astronomical and horological pioneers, clocks and watches of the Maharajas, HMT and its competition, emergence of a titan, modern resurgence. I give you Indian watch history, a fascinating story of time-telling going back to the ancient Indian subcontinent through to the modern day, with many cool watches of different flavours along the way. I hope you enjoy the video. Often, the horological history of India is very focused on HMT from the 60s, but before we move to that, it's important to acknowledge other key parts of the history of time-telling within India and the Indian subcontinent. Of course, as I've mentioned elsewhere, horology is predated by astronomy, where the passage of time was linked to the movements of celestial bodies and seasonal events like the solstices. India was no different here, and the lunar cycle, the Paksha and Pitra, was the backbone to initial time-telling and establishment of calendars. Evidence of astronomical thinking can be tracked back to the Indus Valley civilization from 3300 to 1300 BCE. And there is Vedic astronomy contained within the Veda Sanskrit texts, with the Vedanga Jyotisha attributed to Lagarda being one of the earliest dedicated texts on the topic, from the period 1500 to 500 BCE in the northern Indian subcontinent. In 505 AD, astronomy is evidenced as directly mapping over to horology through the use of sundials during the Gupta era, where a sundial method was used with a gnomon and a shadow. There are some cool sundials across India, such as the ones in Jantar. Another important contributor to Indian astronomy was Aryabhata, who identified the start of the day as midnight and is claimed to have made many of the conclusions around things like orbits and the spherical nature of the Earth that wouldn't be arrived at in the West till much later. His name would be attached to the first Indian satellite in space. Other notable scientists that affected both astronomy and horology were Brahmagupta, who identified the Earth's circumference, with a whole bunch of others like Bhaskaracharyya, who made some very precise calculations of astronomical events that are still impressive today, like the fact that the Earth is very slowly slowing down its spin rate. India utilised other time-telling measures such as time sticks, incense clocks, and water clocks, so we're by no means behind other civilizations here. Indeed, it should be noted that the etymology of horology is claimed to have some Sanskrit origins, with hora being a branch of astrology in opposition to the traditional link to aura in Greek meaning hour. I mean, India even has the Ashoka chakra with 24 spokes, often referred to as the Wheel of Time, on its national flag. But let's get to the more mechanical instruments of clocks and watches. British clocks were in India from the 19th century, and this aligns nicely with a popular story from 1858 about how a sweet shop called Bim Chandra Nag had been requested to make a special sweet for the birthday of Lady Canning, the wife of Charles Canning, the first Viceroy of India. This deep-fried sweet would become known as the Lady Kenny, which was a distortion of the name Lady Canning. In the same year, Thomas Cook and Charles Kelvey, who were British silversmiths, potentially attracted to the sweet shop through this story, visited the shop and apparently liked it so much that they decided to provide a clock for the clockless business, complete with Bengali numbers to make it easier for the workers to read. Another famous clock is the 1878 Bombay, now known as Mumbai, University clock, with other clock towers built in the late 1860s, with examples like the Crawford Market clock in Mumbai, which was renovated by the Ganesh Watch Co. On screen was a clock tower built by Anglo-Indian architect Charles Mant, who attempted to blend British and Indian aesthetics. Of course, the topic of clocks in Mumbai, and indeed India more broadly, is loaded with the politics of the time. In fact, Indian time politics is its whole own topic of history, with so-called Bombay time and India Standard Time 5 hours and 30 minutes ahead of GMT, causing tensions that continue up until this day, I believe. I won't be going into more detail on this here, but I did want to acknowledge that this is a whole area. In 1909 in Calcutta, a Swiss national, Mr. E.O. Gamiter, set up the Anglo-Swiss Watch Company, which would become one of the larger watch brands in India, and would have pocket watch and wristwatch brands such as Cavalry, Horse Brand, Saddle Novelty, and Simplex. They would make trench watches too, such as the example on screen. Of course, the big Swiss brands and other European jewellers and watchmakers have stories about their forays into the India market. Cartier were popular with their Maharajas, the firmament of princes as I've heard them described, and this extended to watches with the 1911 Cartier pocket watch given by George V as a present to Jagatit Singh, the new Maharaja of Kapurthala. Similarly, Vacheron Constantin, the oldest of the Swiss watchmakers, had contact with the India market from 1849, with John Roux of the Vacheron family moving to what is now Mumbai for a number of years and securing multiple orders. An example was this 1916 platinum bracelet with an embedded tube movement watch, which was for the Maharaja of Patiala. You could do a whole video just on the collections of the Maharajas. Favre Leuba, the second oldest Swiss watch brand, was established in 1737 with some cool world firsts. It is now actually owned by Titan of the Tata Group, which we'll come back to, and it began activity in India from 1865, apparently the first Swiss company to do so. And post-World War II was a big favourite of Indian watch retailers, who were one of the company's biggest markets, before they were heavily encouraged to stock HMT, as we'll later discuss. Zenith claimed to have been active in India from 1901, with close ties to the operation of Favre Leuba due to the families of both businesses being close. And famously, Gandhi had a Zenith pocket watch with alarm given to him by India's Prime Minister of the time, Prime Minister Nehru. It was famously stolen but later returned by the apologetic thief. The ever-popular JLC Reverso, launched in 1931, was based on the case of British officer polo players in India, needing a watch that protected the movement from the hard ball used in that sport, as well as for use in military application. Longines claimed their first shipments into India were from 1878, and to prove their presence in India they did a competition round about 2013 to find the oldest Longines watch in India. The Swiss company Alcide Droz and Fils, apparently behind the world's first attested water-resistant watch, the so-called L'Impermeable, would partner with Arnold Sharpie and would enter India in 1886 as the West End Watch Co brand, selling Swiss watches into India, and were a particularly big supplier of the Indian Railways, and they supplied the British Indian Army during the World Wars. Longines were the biggest supplier of West End Co badged watches, although later insisted on their own brand being used on the dial from 1955 onwards, with Mido being another supplier. West End Watch Co brands included Soar, meaning one who rides cavalry, Soar Prima, which had waterproofing and anti-shock technology that they'd managed to secure from Swiss friends from 1934, Secundus, Queen Anne and West End Multifour. Titoni was another Swiss brand with a presence in India. You can see this in their 1955 watch, the Maharaja. Rado is another watch brand that has historically been very popular in India. So of course, there wasn't a vacuum in watches in India available before pre-1961, but there was indeed a big song and dance about the introduction of the government-sponsored Hindustan Machine Tools Limited, or HMT, in Bangalore, activated by Prime Minister Nehru. HMT would be tasked with making made-in-India mechanical watches and would be the dominant brand for decades, known as timekeepers to the nation, with 14,000 units in its first 2 years of production and reportedly over 80 million units over 3 decades. This involved a licensing deal with the Japanese company Citizen, who would supply the base movements. The HMT would modify, and in some cases quite significantly, to produce many affordable watches under the tagline, "If you have the inclination, we have the time." The first hand-wind HMT watches used a licensed form of the 0201 Citizen movement of the early 60s called the 020. The most famous of HMT watches, the Janata, would use this movement, with the Pilot being another popular one. This HMT 17 jewel movement would go on to be modified with the 3-handed 0231, the 2-handed 0232 used in the Sachin and Ankip sub-brands, and the 0233 with side second, and 1809 with date display used in the Tariq and Ravi brands. The 21 jewel iteration of the Citizen 0201 would be licensed to HMT and used in the Jhelum watch. As for the automatics from the 70s, the base movement from Citizen was the 21 jewel 6501 day and date, which would be licensed to HMT as the 6500 and would be heavily modified as well. The basic model was the HMT automatic, with a lot of different flavours of that model. Modified watches included the HMT Leo or Taurus 4-hander with pointer date or pointer day similar to the Oris pointer date or day. Another variant had the day window at the top similar to a Rolex day date like this Pinaki, and HMT ADSL watches also used a variant of this movement. A well sought after watch was this hacking watch supplied only to the military, which used a clever mechanism to modify the same Citizen base caliber to achieve the hacking effect. In addition to these licensed movements, there was also some imported movements from Miyota, part of the Citizen group, which included the 8200 used in the Hisune Premium, and the 8205 used in different Supreme models. More recently, imported Miyota movements have been used for hacking automatics with the Stellar range and skeletonized watches. The Quartz range would begin in 1981 with a space age theme that didn't go down too well, before they launched a more affordable range with a modified tagline, "If you have the inclination, we have the time." The exact time. They would tweak the need for some cooler looking options in 1991 with the Pace and Astra ranges, and in 1992 launched the Zap brand for children. Around 1994, they did a deal with ISA Quartz of France to get access to new quartz movements, which they would use to try and compete with Titan, who'd begun to overtake them at this point. A watch of note in the period, due to it being the first to not list the HMT brand, was the Roman brand with masculine stylings. Now we'll be carrying on the story, but just taking a short breath to say that it would be very appreciated if you were to click subscribe if you're enjoying the video. But let's get back to those other brands looking to break into the market dominated by HMT. The government of Andhra Pradesh began Hyderabad Allwyn Limited in 1981 with the support of Seiko, and they set up to mean business in both mechanical and quartz watches as a competitor to HMT, or at the very least to fill the large supply gap versus demand that was largely being filled with smuggled watches. These guys were behind the first plastic watches of a swatch style in India under the Allwyn Trendy brand, which would follow on to more fashion-oriented options under the same brand, although they reportedly did regret this as it cannibalised their own mechanical watch sales. Phoenix Watch Co. of Mumbai was acquired by Indo French Time Industries in 1965, apparently the first private operator in the Indian watch market. And through the use of French Lawson movements such as the P62A and P72, would gain popularity with the Timestar brand, with most of the watches I've seen using the 17 jewels shockproof movement with a few different cases. Jayco watches began around 1976 in New Delhi, a brand of Jaina Time Industries, and had the support of tech from the West German Favre watches. They would initially do a deal with Timex, but would later be ousted or at least back out of the deal. Favre would later have some of its own made in India watches in the 80s through Hegde and Golay in Bangalore. Hegde and Golay, the other Bangalore-centered watch company, was an initiative incorporated in 1965 between the Swiss Bernard Golay SA, linked with Longines and a pioneer in quartz, and Shankar Hegde, for the manufacture of horological instruments and printed circuit boards. They would seek to go big with their Longines-backed electronic digital watches, but this would largely be squashed due to a desire on the part of the government to retain mechanical HMT and preference for Indian electronics that were rather rudimental at that time. They would make some mechanical watches, and they would market brands such as the Nishant. They would close in the 80s with Tata having a 10% stake before deciding not to really go for it with them. Indo Swiss Time, or IST Watches, is another interesting company that collaborated with the Swiss movement manufacturer Ronda starting in 1977. Apparently having some in-house manufacturing in 1979, I've been able to find a couple of their watches with the sub-brand Mayor with 17 jewels and Super Shock, including one with a date complication. Purewal Associates had some mechanical movements they developed and would also participate in the quartz market. They would become the PA Maxima brand from 1996, which still makes analog quartz watches and smartwatches. The Ajanta brand claims to have been in the game since 1971, started by Udavi Patel in Gujarat as Ajanta Transistor Clock Manufacturing Company. They would launch their Ajanta quartz wristwatch range in 1989. Pentex is another brand I've been able to not find too much about, but they do claim some heritage going back to 1943. Around 1977, Circes Desai and Anil Manchanda kicked off the Watch Project on behalf of the Tata Group. The Tatas had some struggles to get into the watch game as the government favoured the publicly owned HMT, but through the vehicle of the governmental organisation TIDCO, they managed to get started under the joint venture brand Titan with French Evershed Quartz Movement, transitioning to in-house production in 1992, and would finally get going 10 years after the kick-off of the project in 1987, with around 165 quartz watches at launch and lots of advertisement as an international brand that could be bought by Indians, and more of a focus on looking cool versus the more utilitarian stylings of HMT. Brands would include Exacta steel models, Fast Track youthful sporty models, Classique dressy models, Spectra two-tone models, and gold-toned Royale models. They would partner with Timex in 1990, who we'll come back to, and part of that deal was dropping their plastic watch Cura range launched in 1989 under the tagline "Get Ready to Be Noticed," to leave free space for Timex there in the affordable range, with Titan taking the higher end metal market. But over 5 years, that relationship broke down and they would push on independently to become the dominant player in the market, including in the affordable range with the Sonata brand launched in 1997. Other Titan brands of relevance were a revitalised version of the Fast Track range linked to other fashion accessories like sunglasses, Titan Edge using their ultra slim movement, which was launched in 2002 in steel, and later gold, titanium and ceramic iterations, as well as a mechanical iteration. They've done some other mechanical watches under the name Titan Mechanical. Within their present range, they have premium watch ranges including the Edge, XYLYS Swiss made, and Nebula 18 karat gold watches. And within their basic range, recent lines include the Maritime 2 and Octane ranges, and they've acquired licenses for fashion brands such as Kenneth Cole. Timex, via its Noida site outside Delhi, started marketing hard in 1992. The Timex Lextra was the more affordable option, with the Acura range inherited from Titan being the more fashionable option up from that. And finally, the Timex Sports range, apparently marketed with functions known as gimmicks. In 1994, Timex strayed beyond its original plastic brief with the Vista metal quartz watches. Collaborations with local designer Taran Tahliani at domestic launches, as well as the Helix brand and the recent 2021 Benetton collection. But what's emerging in the modern age? First, the Jaipur watch company, established in 2013 by Gaurav Gupta, focused on British Indian coin watches using coins from real collectors, with other watches including the peacock-inspired and 3D printed watches all using Miyota movements. They've sought to get pictures of their watches worn by celebrities as well. Second, Mumbai-based Aiqon, established in 2014 by Chinmay Shah. The Maximum City 1888 watch was their first and was designed after the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus in Mumbai. Third, the Mumbai-based Horpa brand was established in 2017 by Rajiv Asrani and Deepak Chowdhury, with the name combining horology and passion, with quartz watches and its focal men's watch being the C1 chronograph. Fourth, in 2018, Bangalore Watch Co. was founded by Nirupesh Joshi and Mercy Amalraj, harking back to the heritage we've already described from that region, but looking to pay homage to India's scientific achievements rather than the more mystical elements commonly referenced, I believe using Miyota movements. For example, the Apogee watch is linked to India's space exploration and the India Space Research Organisation. The Mach 1 is linked to the MiG-21 Type 77, built under license in India and used in the Indian Air Force from 1947 till 2014. And they have the cricket-themed cover drive. Fifth, Jean Fendi watches, founded by Mr. Rafiq Kapadia in 2007, focused more on the fashion watch market. Sixth, Ajwain watches, established by Vikram Narula, who'd been a collector of watches turned watchmaker. Some notable watches are the Kokori 8 Down, that is themed after the armed train robbery conducted by the Hindustan Republican Association in 1925 as part of the independence movement, with multiple nods in the design of the watch linked to that event. The other is the chronograph using the Hanuman Seagull movement, branded as Shoal of a Ram, after the Chennai racetrack from the 60s to 80s. Finally, Mugnier watches, which claims heritage from 1786 in France, was a brand acquired by Hong Kong-based direct selling company QNet in 2021 to focus on the Indian market via its distributor Vihan Direct Selling. I told you there was some variety. And that's it for today's video focused on Indian watch history. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you did, I would super appreciate a like and a subscription if you aren't already. If you enjoyed this, I think you'd enjoy my deep dive into digital Indian watches, which I've listed on screen here. If you really like my work, I'd be happy to accept a coffee or beer at my Buy Me a Coffee page, which you'll be able to see in the description to this video. And with that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.